Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She laughed when I reached for her. Not a cruel laugh, just small, sharp, effortless. Like I'd said something stupid. "You're so needy with your touch," she said, turning back to her phone. I pulled my hand away and watched the reflection of the screen light flicker across her face. That was the last time I tried to hold her. "My name's Ethan Cole. I'm 38, avionics engineer at a defense contractor in Dayton, Ohio. I build systems that keep planes in the air when everything else fails. Precision is my language. I don't raise my voice. I don't slam doors. I calibrate. For 8 years, I thought that steadiness was enough. My wife, Claire, used to say she loved how calm I was, how safe she felt. Somewhere along the line, safety turned into silence. And silence, in her world, meant absence. Our mornings had a rhythm. I'd leave early, stop at Dunkin' for black coffee and a plain bagel, drive the same route to the hangar. She'd still be asleep when I left, her smartwatch glowing on the nightstand, a playlist still playing quietly through her earbuds. She taught morning classes at Planet Fitness, shouting motivation over pop remixes while I calculated fuel ratios and redundancy systems. 2 different worlds running on opposite frequencies. The first crack showed up in the small things. She stopped answering my texts, started spending longer at work. When I'd ask how her day was, she'd say busy, fine, then scroll through her phone. There was a new trainer at her gym, a younger guy named Dylan, barely 30, built like a commercial for protein powder. She mentioned him a few times, casually. How he understood people. How he actually listens. I didn't react. Engineers don't compete with energy. We measure it. We record it. We wait for patterns. The pattern came fast. Late nights, training clients. New clothes I'd never seen. Perfume that wasn't hers. She started locking her phone. The house I'd built with my hands from IKEA boxes and blueprints started to feel staged. Everything assembled, nothing alive. One night, she came home glowing. She said Dylan was helping her design a new fitness program for YouTube. Said he believed in her potential. Said I should be happy for her. I nodded. But that laugh, when I reached for her that morning, stayed lodged in my chest like static. That was the day I stopped trying to fix us. The next morning, I left the house before sunrise, coffee from Dunkin' cooling in the cup holder. I drove past the gym parking lot, saw her car already there, lights on inside. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel jealous. I just felt clear. Something inside me had recalibrated. When you work with flight systems, you learn one truth early. Failure never happens all at once. It starts as a whisper, a small deviation no one notices until it becomes impossible to correct. That was my marriage. A quiet drift. Claire's world thrived on mirrors and motion. Mine lived in silence and schematics. She needed feedback, eyes on her, validation in real time. I measured progress in decimals and error margins. The difference used to balance us. Now it just built distance. At work, I buried myself in code reviews and test simulations. My supervisor joked that I'd finally found a hobby, ignoring life. I smiled because he wasn't wrong. Every evening I'd drive home, Toyota Tacoma humming steady under the streetlights, and sit in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. It felt like the last calm place left. Inside, Claire was always moving. New leggings from a sponsor, new workouts to film, new collabs for her YouTube channel. She'd talk about engagement metrics like I talked about voltage thresholds. The only difference was that her audience actually cared. One Friday, she told me she and Dylan were hosting a partner fitness workshop. The words hit harder than I expected. I asked if she'd cleared it with management. She said it was her idea, and everyone loved it. Then she laughed again, small, dismissive. "You worry too much, Ethan. Not everything needs a plan." That was when I understood the real problem. She didn't want steadiness. She wanted spark. And spark meant friction. That night, I opened a spreadsheet, not for work, but for life. I listed every bill, every shared account, every subscription tied to both our names. It wasn't revenge. It was preparation. Engineers don't react. We design exits. A week later, while she was away filming, I cleared half the closet. Packed quietly, methodically. Took only what I owned before we married. I left the IKEA bedroom looking untouched, almost symmetrical, like nothing had changed. Before leaving, I placed my house key on the kitchen counter beside her gym pass. It wasn't a message. It was confirmation. When I started the Tacoma, her playlist was still connected to the car's Bluetooth. Some upbeat remix echoed through the speakers, her voice in the background cheering someone else on. I switched it off. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clean. That night, I checked into a short-term rental near the airfield. Empty room, single bed, view of the runway. For the first time in years, I slept without listening for her voice in the dark. The first morning alone felt like a system reboot. No noise, no perfume clouding the air, no notifications from her phone lighting up the nightstand. Just the hum of the heater and the soft rumble of jets taking off across the airfield. I sat on the edge of the bed with a Dunkin' coffee in hand, staring at the blank wall, realizing I didn't feel broken. I just felt recalibrated. At work, people noticed I'd stopped wearing my ring. I didn't explain. Engineers don't give status updates unless required. Instead, I signed up for a side project testing drone stabilization algorithms. It started as a distraction, ended as something else. Each night, I stayed late, experimenting with control surfaces, GPS locks, microcontrollers. Small, precise machines that did exactly what you told them to. No arguments. No laughter. Just logic. The quiet became addictive. Claire texted 3 days later. "Are you really not coming back?" It wasn't a plea, more like a question asked out of habit. I didn't answer. The next message came that weekend, a link to her YouTube video. She looked perfect under the gym lights, hair tied back, voice confident as she introduced a couple's workout for balance and trust. Dylan stood beside her, smiling like a proud apprentice. I watched in silence. She wasn't cheating for love or lust. She was chasing reflection, needing to see herself admired. I had spent years giving her quiet respect. He gave her visible worship. She mistook that for connection. When the video ended, I closed my laptop and drove to a storage facility outside town. Inside, I rented a small unit and started bringing equipment there, tools, spare drone parts, my old workbench. I wasn't running away. I was rebuilding. By the end of the month, I'd signed a short-term lease on a rundown workshop near the edge of the industrial park. Concrete floor, fluorescent lights, and a single metal desk. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That night, sitting under the buzz of cheap lighting, I soldered flight boards and thought about control. About how some people fear silence because it reveals who they really are. Claire feared it. I thrived in it. When I finished the first working prototype, I named it Echo. Because that's what she'd become, something that only made noise when I spoke first. Word travels fast in small cities, especially when someone decides to turn their private life into content. Claire's YouTube channel grew faster than I expected. 1 month, she was showing form corrections. The next, she was giving motivational speeches about letting go of what drains you. I was apparently the drain. Her followers loved it. They called her brave, independent, a survivor of quiet control. At first, I ignored it. But then one of my coworkers, Marcus, mentioned seeing me tagged in a clip. "Man, she's really building an audience," he said carefully. I just nodded. Engineers don't explain personal systems to people who speak in emotion. That night, I watched one of her uploads. She stood at Planet Fitness, smiling too brightly, saying that strength comes from breaking free of patterns. In the background, Dylan was adjusting her mic cable, his hand brushing her shoulder just long enough to register. She didn't pull away. She looked at the camera like she was waiting for me to see it. Instead, I powered down the laptop and got back to work. The drone business had started attracting attention. A logistics startup in Cincinnati needed prototypes for aerial delivery testing. They offered a consulting contract, temporary, remote, good money. I accepted. The workshop that used to smell like solder and metal now smelled like purpose. Every morning, I'd stop at Dunkin' for coffee, then drive to the shop. Same order, same parking spot. Routine was control, and control was peace. 2 months passed before Claire reached out again. This time, she called instead of texting. I didn't answer. The voicemail came seconds later, her voice softer, less rehearsed. "I miss when things were easy, Ethan. When you just listen." I replayed it once, then deleted it. Listening wasn't the problem. She'd just stopped hearing. By spring, I'd finished a new series of drones designed for terrain mapping. The startup wanted to scale production. offered me a permanent position as lead consultant. I signed the papers that week. Claire posted another video the same day, this time about healing after emotional distance. The comments called her an inspiration. I didn't feel anger, just detachment. She was building a digital version of herself, louder, brighter, and further from reality. Meanwhile, I was building something that actually flew. By early summer, my workshop no longer looked like a side project. It looked like a company. Shelves lined with drone shells, circuit boards stacked in labeled bins, prototypes hanging from ceiling hooks like sleeping birds. I spent 10 hours a day there, perfecting the flight software, tracking performance logs, refining systems until failure was nearly impossible. Silence had become productivity. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about Claire, but only as a variable I'd already solved. She'd built her own kind of machine, one that ran on validation. Every like, every comment, another pulse of energy keeping her alive. I'd built one that didn't need an audience to function. That difference said everything. One afternoon, I stopped by the old house to collect a few documents I'd forgotten. Her car wasn't there, but the garage door was open. Inside, the walls were painted bright white, mirrors mounted where my workbench used to be. She'd turned the space into a home studio. The air smelled like energy drinks and perfume. There was a camera set up, ring light still on, and in the corner, a sweatshirt hanging on the back of a chair. Not mine. I recognized the logo from Planet Fitness. I didn't stay long. Engineers don't need confrontation to confirm data. I closed the door quietly and drove away. That night, I filed the final paperwork to transfer utilities out of my name. The next morning, I bought the workshop property outright. No more temporary leases, no more shared anything. My name alone on every form. When the startup CEO called, he asked if I'd consider joining their leadership team. "We're impressed with your systems approach," he said. I accepted without hesitation. For the first time, my life was running at my own pace, structured, deliberate, and free of static. A week later, Claire posted a new video. She was crying this time, talking about how people change when they stop feeling seen. Her followers flooded the comments with sympathy. I just watched quietly, noticing the same detail others missed. The empty gym behind her, no background music, no Dylan in sight. It wasn't vindication. It was observation. Systems always collapse when they run beyond their design limits. Hers just reached that point sooner than mine. 3 months later, the startup invited me to a tech expo in Chicago. I hadn't left Ohio in years, but something about this trip felt like closing a loop. The company wanted to showcase the drone stabilization system I'd designed. They called it revolutionary. I just called it stable. The night before the event, I stayed in a small hotel near the convention center, checking diagnostics one last time. As I powered down the system, I noticed a notification on my phone, an unread message from Claire. The preview said, "I saw your name on LinkedIn." I didn't open it. I already knew what it meant. The next morning, our booth was surrounded by investors. My drones hovered perfectly in sync, smooth and quiet. A journalist from a tech magazine asked about my design philosophy. I said, "Reliability is underrated. People chase excitement, but stability keeps things airborne." He smiled like he understood, but I could tell he didn't. Most people don't until they crash. After the presentation, I stepped outside to get some air. Chicago's noise was overwhelming after months of silence. Cars, sirens, people shouting into phones. Then I heard it, someone calling my name. I turned and saw her. Claire. She looked thinner, tanner, a little tired around the eyes. She said she'd seen a post about the expo on LinkedIn, that she'd flown in for a fitness brand event nearby. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you," she said, voice softer than I remembered. I nodded, thanked her, and waited for what always came next, the need for closure. Instead, she asked if I still drove the Tacoma. I said yes. She smiled faintly. "That truck was always your space," she said. Then she hesitated. "You really never looked back, did you?" I didn't answer. She filled the silence like she always did. "Dylan left the gym," she said, as if that meant something. "He got a new job out west." I wished her well and walked away. No anger, no satisfaction, just completion. Back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and updated my LinkedIn headline, "Aerospace Systems Consultant, Cincinnati." The next morning, the post announcing our drone program went live. Within hours, my inbox filled with messages from recruiters, colleagues, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Claire never wrote again. By fall, I had become the company's quiet backbone. Investors wanted results, and I delivered them without noise. My department doubled in size, my paycheck tripled, but what mattered most was the stillness I carried with me. I'd stopped explaining myself to people who spoke in volume instead of logic. Sometimes I'd see Claire's face online, her older videos recycled by fitness pages that didn't know the full story. Her subscriber count had plateaued. She'd gone from daily uploads to monthly ones, her smile dimming with each post. The algorithm had moved on, the way people do when applause fades. One afternoon, while testing a new drone prototype, I saw a job posting from a different startup we were merging with. They needed a wellness consultant for their employee program. The name on the listing stopped me cold. Dylan. Same guy. Same overconfident smile in the attached photo. It wasn't anger that came next. It was curiosity. Our companies were scheduled to collaborate on a hybrid tech launch in a few weeks. Meaning, eventually, we'd be in the same room. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't need to. Engineers know systems correct themselves when pressure's applied. When the day arrived, I showed up early. The event was held in a renovated warehouse, sleek lighting, polished concrete floors, buffet tables that no one touched. Dylan arrived late, wearing a logo-branded polo and the same easy charm I remembered from those videos. He scanned the room, smiling at everyone until his eyes landed on me. Recognition hit, like static. He nodded politely. I nodded back. Nothing more. During the presentation, our teams rotated through stations. At one point, Dylan's group joined mine. He avoided eye contact, focusing on the equipment. When I demonstrated the drone's remote stabilization system, I caught him watching, not the screen, but me. Afterward, he approached, forced a handshake, said he admired the project. His tone carried the faint tremor of someone who'd heard stories. I kept my response simple. Precision matters. Then I moved on. That was the moment I realized revenge doesn't require confrontation. Sometimes, it's enough to exist as proof that someone else was temporary. On the drive home that night, the city lights reflected off the Tacoma's windshield like runway markers. I didn't look back. I just followed the line ahead, steady, deliberate, unshakable. After that day, I didn't think about Dylan again. He'd become background noise, another flicker in a system that had already stabilized. But life has a way of circling back to test whether you've truly moved on. The test came 2 weeks later. The new company's HR team scheduled a corporate retreat, 3 days of workshops, team building, and cross-department synergy. I almost declined, but the CEO insisted my presence would reassure investors. The retreat was at a resort 2 hours away. I drove there in my truck, dunking coffee in the cup holder, playlists low and steady. The first evening passed quietly. I led a small session on drone logistics and data ethics. Afterward, a group invited me to the lounge for drinks. I don't drink much, but I joined them out of courtesy. The room was loud with laughter and bad karaoke. Then I saw her. Claire. She wasn't supposed to be there. But apparently, she'd been hired as a freelance wellness consultant for the retreat. Life has a sense of symmetry I'll never understand. She froze when she saw me, wineglass in hand, eyes wide. I just nodded politely and returned to my seat. Later, as people drifted off to their rooms, she walked over. Her voice was lower now, quieter. You look different, she said. I told her that was the point. She asked about the drones, the company, the workshop. Small talk to fill the air between what we'd been and what we'd become. Finally, she said, I didn't know Dylan worked with you. I said he doesn't. He works near me. Her laugh was short, brittle. She looked down, then whispered, he wasn't what I thought. I didn't respond. Some silences are final. When I left the lounge, she was still standing there, staring into her glass like it might explain the last 2 years. Outside, the air was sharp, cool. I walked toward the parking lot, each step deliberate. My Tacoma waited under a streetlight, dust on the hood, steady as ever. Before starting the engine, I glanced at my phone. A new connection request on LinkedIn, from her. I didn't accept it. I didn't decline either. Some things don't need closure. They just need distance. The next morning, the retreat carried on as if nothing had happened. Team exercises, group lunches, corporate icebreakers, all designed to simulate connection. I moved through it quietly, polite but detached. Engineers don't do theater. We observe it. Claire kept her distance at first. During a break between sessions, I saw her by the pool, talking to one of the HR reps. Her voice was calm, practiced, the same tone she used to use when filming. But when our eyes met, she looked away. Later, she found me by the coffee table. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. We stepped outside to a patio overlooking the lake. She said she'd been trying to find her footing after everything, that the online life had swallowed her whole. I listened without interrupting. She talked about burnout, about Dylan leaving, about the loneliness that comes when the applause fades. Finally, she said, "You were always steady." I didn't understand that before. Her words should have meant something. They didn't. Not anymore. When she asked if I'd ever missed her, I told her the truth. "I missed who I thought you were." She nodded, eyes glassy but dry. Then she whispered, "You don't even touch me anymore, not even with words." That was the irony. She once said I was needy with my touch. Now she was starving for it. The last night of the retreat, the company hosted a dinner. People laughed too loudly, drank too much. Claire sat at another table, surrounded by strangers who didn't know her story. I left early. On my way out, I passed the fitness banner she'd helped design. Bright colors, motivational slogans, all about strength and balance. Words she'd built a career on but never mastered. Driving back to my room, I felt something shift, not regret, not anger. Just closure settling into place like a well-fitted part. When I woke the next morning, the sun was cutting through the blinds, painting the walls gold. My phone buzzed with a message from the startup CEO. "Congrats, Ethan. You're being promoted. Full-time systems lead." I looked out the window toward the lake where Claire was leading a morning yoga session for the last time. She moved gracefully, perfectly balanced, yet somehow off-center. I sipped my coffee and let the silence say everything. When the retreat ended, I packed my bag and left before anyone noticed. The drive home was long and quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore. It just exists. The road stretched out ahead, and the Tacoma's steady hum felt like the heartbeat of a life I'd built from scratch. Back in Dayton, the workshop greeted me like an old friend. Dust in the air, sunlight cutting through the blinds, the faint smell of solder still clinging to the walls. I powered up the main console and ran diagnostics on the latest drone. Perfect balance, zero drift. It lifted into the air smoothly, hovered, then landed exactly where it had started. Predictable, reliable, the kind of precision people mistake for magic when it's just discipline. Later that week, the company held a small event to celebrate the new contract we'd secured. A government deal, large-scale production, multi-year funding. Everyone was buzzing, taking photos for LinkedIn, shaking hands. I stood at the edge of the room, watching. When someone asked me to give a few words, I said only this: good systems don't chase attention. They earn trust. It was short, but the room went silent. That was enough. A few nights after, I got another message, this time from an unknown number. "I saw your speech," it said. No name. But I knew. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to clarify, no proof to give. The conversation had ended long before she realized it. Sometimes I still see her face online, buried in the algorithm, somewhere between yoga ads and motivational clips. The voice that once filled our house now echoes through screens for strangers. Maybe that's where she feels seen. My life now runs on quieter rhythms. Early mornings with coffee, long hours designing flight paths, evenings spent watching the sunset from the workshop roof. The city hums in the distance, but up there it feels like the world has finally stopped demanding noise. She laughed when I reached for her once. I pulled my hand back and built something steadier than touch, something that doesn't fade when the applause stops. Now, when I walk into a room, I don't reach for anyone. Yet somehow, everywhere I go, I can feel her eyes searching, and I never look back. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.